Hello, my friends. I am here today to talk to you about the evolution of the modern diet and how it is that we've arrived at this present day situation where we experience such a disconnect with our food that we really no longer are tuned into our innate wisdom when it comes to nutrition. So, for 66,000 generations, humans ate primarily fish, meat, nuts, seeds, vegetables, and some starchy plants. Our ancestors were also very physically active and lived in sync with their circadian rhythm. So that meant that they were rising with the sun and going to sleep when it was dark. They were also very lean and fit and free from chronic disease. So, although studies show that most people, or most of our ancestors mostly, only lived to the age of 30, the circumstances for this explain why. So, there was a very high rate of infant mortality, warfare, trauma, accidents, exposure to the elements, and really just a complete lack of modern medicine. So, when we take these factors into consideration, our ancestors actually lived lifespans that are relatively equal to our own. Today's foods and lifestyle cause us to crave foods that may harm us instead of leading us to optimal health. So, diabetes and obesity combined affect 1 billion people worldwide. 600,000 people die of heart attacks each year. Cancer is now the number 2 cause of death in the United States, accounting for 1 in 4 deaths each year, and a third of Americans have high blood pressure. Almost 3 in 4 Americans over 75 years old have high blood pressure. More than 36 million people have dementia, and 50 million Americans now suffer from autoimmune disease. So, as you can see, there's been a significant increase in chronic diseases that are causing death in modern day times. You'll also see that in comparison to the Paleolithic era and to the lifestyle that our ancestors led, we now consume white sugar, flour, and vegetable oil, making up on average 50% of our calories, and we're more sedentary than ever before. So there are a number of different ways that foods today interfere with our body's fine balance. Chemical components in foods can increase hunger levels and turn off normal hunger cues for satiety. Eating nutrient-poor, calorie-rich foods leads to increased appetite as we continue to search for sufficient nutrients. So what this means is that even though our bodies calorically may be satisfied, we're not giving our bodies the nutrients that it needs, and so it's still craving more. And we interpret those hunger signals as a signal for more food, but we're not necessarily giving our bodies the nutrients that it needs when we are giving it more food. Corporate farming practices have led to extreme nutrient loss in soil, so even whole food sources of foods are less nutrient dense than they would have been historically. Access to real food is not universally available in all communities, so many people have to turn to packaged foods since that's the only option that they have. And then the rapid rise in food reactions can lead to both picky and disordered eating. So this modern day disconnect between people, the environment, and food can be attributed to 6 key milestones during the course of our history. So we're going to take a look at what those are right now. So here we go. The 6 key milestones are the agricultural revolution, the introduction of refined sugar, the industrial revolution, the rise of big food, the chemical revolution, and the digital revolution, also known as the information age. So let's start things off by taking a deeper dive into the agricultural revolution. So prior to the agricultural revolution, people were what is commonly known as hunter-gatherers. What that means is that groups and communities used the strategy of foraging for sourcing their food. So they would go out and search for food as opposed to being in one place and farming, which is what happened with the agricultural revolution. So about 10 to 12,000 years ago, people began growing and raising their food in one place instead of finding and following their food. There was an increased reliance on farmed food crops and domesticated animals, as well as the development of larger and more permanent settlements. And it's interesting to note that the agricultural revolution was not an isolated incident. So it didn't occur in just one place at one time. It happened around the world at various times within the same kind of historical period. And it was really influenced by different factors. In some places, for example, it was actually forced upon people via colonization. While the agricultural revolution did provide a lot of societal benefits, it also brought with it some high costs. So the result was that there was fewer nutrient-dense foods, there was a rapid loss of bone density, habitat loss and soil degradation, increased spread of communicable diseases, and creation of societal hierarchies, inequality, slavery, and genocide. Average carbohydrate consumption also increased as protein consumption decreased. In addition to that, the quality of the protein that we were consuming also went down. Moving on, let's briefly consider the proliferation of processed sugar. So when sugar was introduced, this was around the 1600s, it really was a luxury just enjoyed by the wealthy. But it became gradually cheaper and cheaper to produce. And so consumption actually went from a few pounds per person per year to 150 to 200 pounds per year. That is what it is today. So I mean, that's just a vast amount when you look at that number. 150 to 200 pounds is the equivalent of someone's body weight in sugar a year. Gary Taubes writes in his book, The Case Against Sugar, that sugars are fundamental causes of obesity and diabetes, using the simple concept of causality that we employ when we say smoking causes lung cancer. The Industrial Revolution significantly changed how people live, eat, and work, as more and more people began moving to cities and away from where food is produced. So people actually then began buying food instead of eating foods raised and harvested by themselves. And because of this meant that food needed to be processed so it wouldn't spoil when it was being transported from the farms to the cities. In the first 100 years of the Industrial Revolution, the world population nearly doubled from 700 million to 1.2 billion. So the Industrial Revolution really had a drastic effect on how we live and also just created this population explosion as well, which meant that producing food needed to be taken up to the next level. Dr. Weston Price was a dentist and a nutritional pioneer during this time. He actually traveled the world studying traditional cultures and contrasting their diets and health with those of industrialized countries. He concluded that tooth decay, poor bone development, and chronic diseases of civilization are primarily caused by nutrient deficiencies and the nutrient-poor foods found in modern industrialized diets. And then as Chris Kressa put it, he said that there's no doubt that agriculture led to a significant decline in our overall health, but the Industrial Revolution was really the knockout punch. It brought us to where we are today, when white sugar, flour, and vegetable oil make up over 50% of the calories that the average person living in the industrialized world consumes each day. Next, let's consider the rise of big foods. So after the introduction of processed foods, a number of new food companies sprang up in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of these brand names. So those food companies were Dr. Pepper, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Nestle, which was started in the late 1800s and which is today now the 33rd largest public company. Kellogg's and Post cereals also got started in the early 1900s. And a lot of these food giants did actually start with good intentions. Kellogg's, for instance, started with a mission of bringing health to sanatoriums where people were having digestive issues. But now we very much see that these giant companies are influenced and motivated by profit. They use strategies like hyperpalatability so that consumers actually get hooked on their products. They have also marketed towards children to influence parental purchasing, and they have a tremendous influence over public policy and research. Moving on to the chemical revolution in World War II, this again significantly impacted our day-to-day nutrition. So civilians were actually encouraged to try new food products like margarine because foods like butter were preferentially sent to the troops. So what was the result of this? Well, we find ourselves left with foods that are cheap, produced in abundance, heavily processed, non-perishable, and covered in chemical fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides. So these are the kinds of foods that leave our bodies hungry for nutrients, especially because they are chemically processed and generated. Our bodies are not as familiar in terms of understanding how to process them. So bringing things all the way up to present day, the digital revolution and the information age, this really saw a rapid shift from mechanical and analog technology to digital electronics, computing, and communications. Although the digital revolution has brought many benefits to society, including the area of nutrition by allowing us to communicate and raise awareness and connect communities in grassroots food movements, it has also led to a decline in the quality of our lives by significantly impacting how we sleep, work, move, and eat. The amount of physical activity and leisure time we now have has diminished. Our posture has also been compromised by digital media, and posture is significant because it affects the function of our digestive system. So the worse our posture, the worse our ability to absorb nutrients that we need to thrive. Although debates about the real detrimental effect of things like blue light exposure from our devices is controversial, one thing is for sure: we are far less healthy now than ever before.